Some houses are haunted by regret, some by rage, and some by something not human at all. Tonight, we enter 3 real locations where evil left its mark. 1. A child's ghost who never forgave. Another, the attic of a socialite hiding monstrous secrets. And a quiet farmhouse in Kentucky, besieged by things bullets couldn't stop. These stories aren't fiction, they're documented. Eyewitnesses are still alive, but by the time we're done, you may wish they weren't true. If you enjoy true horror, subscribe now. And if you dare watch till the end and comment which story haunted you most. They thought the small handprints on the walls were just from their baby son, until they found some on the ceiling over 5 feet high. In 1994, Tony and Deborah Pickman moved into a modest rental home at 508 North 2nd Street in Atchison, Kansas. The couple had just welcomed their newborn son and were looking for a quiet, affordable place to start their lives as a family. The house, a 2-story structure with faded white siding and creaky wood floors, seemed like a good fit. But it didn't take long for strange things to begin. Within the first week, Deborah noticed cold spots in the hallway that wouldn't go away even during the peak of summer. Electrical items flickered. The TV turned on by itself. Lights went out for no reason. Their baby monitor crackled with static, and at times, she heard faint breathing through it. She assumed it was just stress or faulty wiring. Then the scratches started. Tony would wake up with long, red marks on his arms, chest, or back. At first, he blamed the family cat until they locked the pet out of the room, and the scratches still appeared. One night, as Deborah sat on the couch next to him, she watched in disbelief as 3 fresh welts formed across his stomach right in front of her. There was nothing there, no explanation. That's when they began to question what was really going on in the house. Curious and increasingly afraid, Deborah began researching the home's past. According to local history, the house had once belonged to a doctor in the early 1900s who used the downstairs as his residence and the upstairs as a small operating room. One story stood out. A 6-year-old girl named Sallie had been rushed to the home with severe abdominal pain. Believing it was appendicitis, the doctor allegedly began operating immediately. But something went wrong. Sallie died on the table. Some believe she hadn't been fully anesthetized. Others say she felt everything. Whatever the truth, the girl died violently and possibly in agony. And if the stories were true, her spirit never left. The Pickmans tried to cope. Deborah even placed dolls and toys in the nursery, hoping to appease the child's spirit. But it only escalated things. Tony began seeing her. He described a little girl in a turn-of-a-century dress, with dark hair and emotionless eyes. She never spoke. Sometimes, she stood in the nursery. Other times, she appeared in the hallway or at the foot of their bed, just watching, and sometimes, smiling. The attacks grew more violent, but strangely, they only targeted Tony. Objects flew at him without warning. Knives launched from drawers. Lights would explode. One night, while climbing the stairs, he felt hands grab his ankles, nearly sending him crashing backward. Deborah, for the most part, was spared. Some paranormal researchers later speculated that Sallie had bonded with Deborah, or worse, grown possessive. Tony, in her eyes, was a threat, still seeking answers. The couple invited Deborah's sister to stay the night. She lasted one night. She later recalled waking up in the guest room to see a small child standing near the bed, staring at her with a twisted, furious expression. Then, she felt hands around her neck. Gasping, she sat up. No one was there. But the bedspread was covered in tiny handprints, child-sized. That was when the Pickmans contacted a local team of paranormal investigators. Their findings were disturbing. Using thermal imaging, they captured freezing cold spots that moved independently, as if following someone. EVP sessions revealed chilling whispers. One voice hissed, "Get out." Another rasped, "Mine." A cameraman was scratched across the chest in real time, while standing alone in the hallway. Another had their equipment flung to the ground. The most shocking evidence came from the photos. In one image, a cloudy mist hovered near the staircase. In another, Tony stood with his back to the camera, deep red scratches forming across his skin beneath an untouched shirt. Moments later, blood soaked through the fabric. None of it could be explained. And for Tony, things got worse. He began to sleepwalk, often waking in the nursery without remembering how he got there. He suffered from vivid nightmares of a young girl burning, screaming. He became distant, depressed, paranoid. One night, Deborah found him standing in the kitchen, staring blankly at the wall for nearly an hour. When she touched his shoulder, he turned and whispered, "She says you have to go." By now, the baby had begun crying every night at precisely 3:17 a.m., the same time Sallie reportedly died. That was the breaking point. The family packed their things and fled the house. But the presence didn't stay behind. Tony claimed to see Sallie's reflection in windows always just behind him. Deborah said she sometimes awoke with the distinct chemical smell of ether in the air. Their child, as he grew older, had no memory of the house, but he often drew pictures of a little girl with no eyes. The Sallie house still stands today. It's now a well-known location for ghost hunters, skeptics, and thrill-seekers. Many who visit report the same phenomena: icy cold spots, sudden nosebleeds, growling voices, lights that explode or dim without warning. Some leave with scratches, others faint inside the nursery. Some never make it through the night. But one warning remains: constant weather from locals, paranormal teams, or past residents. If you enter the Sallie house, don't mock her, don't challenge her, and above all, don't stand too close to the nursery door, because sometimes it opens on its own, and when it does, something might be standing on the other side. The screams were so frequent, people stopped asking questions, but when the fire broke and the attic was finally opened, what they found was beyond anything New Orleans had ever seen. In the heart of New Orleans' French Quarter, at 1140 Royal Street, stands a grand Creole-style mansion with curling iron balconies and pale shutters. Tourists pass it daily, taking photos and repeating ghost stories. But what happened there in April of 1834 isn't legend. It was real, and it was far more horrifying than any fiction. At the center of it all was Madame Delphine LaLaurie, wealthy, respected socialite, known for her elegance and lavish parties. She was admired by New Orleans high society for her beauty, wealth, and charm. But inside her home, behind closed doors, something sinister was happening. House staff frequently changed. Enslaved servants came and went, many of them never seen again. Rumors began to spread, especially after a young enslaved girl reportedly leaped from the third-floor balcony. Her body was found twisted on the stones below. When questioned, LaLaurie insisted the girl had gone mad. But those closer to the household told a darker story, that the girl had accidentally pulled Delphine's hair while brushing it. In a fit of rage, Delphine had chased her through the halls with a whip. Cornered between the attic and the open air, the girl chose the fall. That's when whispers turned to suspicion. Neighbors began reporting screams late at night. Some claimed they saw pale, thin figures peeking out from the upper window's hands, reaching out, only to be yanked away. Others swore they heard chains dragging across the floorboards. Still, no one dared interfere. Not in 1834 Louisiana. Not against a woman of such wealth and influence. Then came the fire. On the morning of April 10, 1834, smoke began pouring from the rear of the mansion. Flames licked the walls of the servant quarters. Bystanders rushed in to help, but Delphine LaLaurie refused to give them access to the upper floors. She screamed, ordering them to stay away from the attic. That made people even more suspicious. A group of men forced their way past her. They broke down the attic door and stepped into something that would leave them scarred for life. The attic was not a storage space. It was a chamber of torture. Chains hung from the walls, stained with rust and blood. Some were still fastened to human forms, emaciated, broken, barely alive. The smell inside was suffocating: rotting flesh, dried blood, and something chemical that burned the throat. Claw marks were gouged into the wooden walls and doors. They found victims: enslaved men and women shackled to tables, some with iron collars fused to their necks. One man had deep wounds carved into his back. Another was missing limbs. A woman had crude stitches running down her body. Some were conscious, barely able to speak. Others had long since gone silent. One rescuer collapsed on the floor. Another ran out and vomited in the street. Several later reported hearing whispers in the attic, though none of the victims moved their lips. One woman claimed to see a shadow standing in the corner, tall and still, watching. News of the atrocity spread like wildfire. By nightfall, a mob had gathered outside the mansion, furious, demanding justice. But Delphine LaLaurie was gone. She had slipped away during the chaos into the swamps. Others believe she escaped by boat to Paris. She was never brought to justice, never seen in New Orleans again. But the house remained. In the years that followed, the LaLaurie mansion gained a reputation as one of the most haunted places in America. Owners came and went, none staying long. Reports of strange noises, cold drafts, and distant crying became common. People spoke of footsteps overhead when the upper floors were empty, of doors opening on their own, and of a woman's voice echoing in the halls, sharp, angry, and impossible to trace. One tenant claimed he awoke to find long scratches down his back despite sleeping alone. Another fled the property after hearing a child whisper in his ear, "Don't go to the attic." The most terrifying reports all circle back to the attic. Though sealed off for decades, workers report cold air leaking from beneath the door. Some say they hear weeping, others the clatter of chains dragging across the floor. Handprints have been spotted on the glass from the inside, some too small to belong to an adult. Over time, the line between history and horror blurred. Paranormal investigators have called the mansion a hotspot of energy where cruelty, trauma, and violence have soaked into the walls. Psychics claim the spirits trapped inside are not just lingering, they're suffering, still chained, still waiting to be freed. Some believe that Madame LaLaurie herself returned after death, doomed to walk the halls of her home forever. There are stories of a tall woman in a black gown, carrying a whip, seen pacing the corridors at night. She appears in mirrors, vanishes through walls, and is always angry. To this day, the attic remains closed to the public. No tours are allowed inside. No one is permitted to break the seal. But those who work in the building say they still hear things. They still feel the cold. And sometimes when the night is quiet and the street is empty, they see them. Tiny handprints on the inside of the attic windows, fading as quickly as they appear. And if you stand too close to the gates on Royal Street for too long, you might hear it. The clinking of old iron chains, and someone moving just above your head, 2 stories down. And the last might be the strangest of all. If you're still watching, you're brave. Hit like to prove it. They thought it was a meteor. But by nightfall, something surrounded the farmhouse, something not human, and not afraid of bullets. August 21st, 1955, Kelly, Kentucky, a quiet farming town, nothing out of the ordinary. That night, the Sutton family's farmhouse would become the center of one of the strangest and most terrifying close encounters in American history. 11 people were there, friends, relatives, tired from the long day, just sitting down for supper. No one had been drinking. No one was telling stories. No one was prepared for what was about to happen. It started just before sunset. Billy Ray Taylor, a visitor staying at the home, stepped out back to fetch water from the well. That's when he saw it. A metallic object, glowing, silent, streaking across the sky and trailing a green tail. He said it dipped low, behind the trees, and disappeared. He ran back inside, shaken, claiming he'd seen a UFO. The others didn't take him seriously, not yet. But around 8 p.m., the family dog began barking violently. Then, it cowered under the house and wouldn't come out. Something was moving in the fields. At first, they thought it might be a wild animal or maybe a prank. But then, just beyond the tree line, something emerged. It was unlike anything they'd ever seen. Small, about 3 to 4 feet tall. Its skin was silvery, reflective like metal. Its limbs were long and spindly. Its head oversized, nearly bulbous, with glowing yellow eyes set wide apart, and its arms reached down almost to its knees, ending in what looked like claws. It moved strangely, almost floating. Another one appeared, then another peeking from around trees, crawling along the roof, watching. They didn't walk like people. They glided, weightless, smooth, silent. The Suttons locked the doors, shut off the lights, and then they armed themselves. With hunting rifles and shotguns, they watched from the windows. That's when one of the creatures moved closer, just inches from the doorway. Billy Ray fired. The creature flipped backward, hit the ground, and then floated off into the darkness like nothing had happened. Another crawled onto the roof. They fired through the ceiling. Something fell, but again no sound, no body, just more movement in the dark. It wasn't an invasion, it was a siege. The family said these beings surrounded the house for hours, tapping on walls, scratching at doors, peering through windows, always just out of reach, always watching. And no matter how many times they were shot, the same thing happened: hit, fall back, float away. Not once did one of them stay down. Inside, the atmosphere turned cold. The children were crying, hiding under beds. The adults whispered among themselves, too afraid to move. They didn't know if these creatures were trying to break in or just waiting for something. By 11 p.m., they made a decision. they piled into 2 cars and drove straight to the Hopkinsville police station. They burst through the doors in panic, disheveled, breathless, terrified. The officers on duty didn't know what to make of it, but something about the group's fear seemed too real to ignore. These weren't pranksters. They weren't looking for publicity. They looked like people who had seen something they couldn't explain and didn't want to. A group of police officers, state troopers, and military personnel returned to the farmhouse with them. What they found confirmed something had happened. Bullet holes riddled the walls and doors. Glass from the shattered windows covered the floors. Shell casings were everywhere. Parts of the yard had been torn up, strange impressions in the dirt, like circular markings, but not from shoes or animals. Something else. But the creatures were gone. The police searched the property and the woods for nearly 2 hours. Dogs were brought in. Flashlights combed through trees. Nothing. Eventually, the officers left, telling the family to report anything else unusual. They didn't have to wait long. At around 3:30 a.m., just as the house began to settle, the tapping returned. On the walls of the roof. Then, a glowing yellow face appeared at the window, peering inside, motionless. But this time, the family didn't shoot. They didn't move. They waited. And just before sunrise, the beings disappeared for good. No tracks, no noise, just gone. The next morning, local and national newspapers exploded with headlines. Invasion by little men reported in Kentucky. Though the witnesses never described the creatures as green, the press began calling them little green men. It stuck. Project Blue Book, the U.S. Air Force's official UFO investigation program, added the event to its files. Their conclusion: a hoax or mass hysteria. No further investigation. But here's the thing. The Suttons never asked for money, never invited media attention. In fact, they actively refused it. They declined interviews, ignored journalists, and stayed out of the spotlight for decades. They weren't seeking fame, they just wanted to forget. But the questions still linger. What exactly did they see that night? Why didn't the creatures react to bullets or sound? And most chilling of all, what would have happened if those beings had decided to come inside? So now you've heard them all. But which one felt real to you? The girl who scratched through dimensions, the screams behind sealed doors, or the creatures outside the window? Comment your pick. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe and turn on notifications. We go deeper every week.